President Trump announced that former Fox News personality Dan Bongino will be second in command to lead the FBI. This is the latest in a series of Trump's controversial picks for high-profile law enforcement roles. Trump named Bongino as deputy FBI director yesterday. To note, that job is traditionally held by a career FBI agent. In fact, it's believed this is the first time a political appointee got that post. He is a former Secret Service agent and NYPD officer, though he has never served in the FBI. As a pro-Trump podcaster, he has advanced a number of baseless theories about the bureau he is set to lead. The appointment does not require Senate confirmation, but it's already receiving real backlash. Here's how one former FBI official reacted to Bongino's new role, saying in part, quote, "This is really concerning. Any hope that Cash, meaning Cash Bell, the FBI director, could be steered by having experienced leaders around him is out the window. We now have two conspiracy theorists and election deniers running our premier law enforcement and intelligence agency. That is beyond problematic." And Caddy, Bongino is repeatedly on his podcast calling for the dismissal of any agent who had anything to do with some of the Trump investigations, including the lawful with a warrant FBI search of Mar-a-Lago that turned up all those classified documents a couple summers ago. But he's also cut from the same cloth, it would appear, as Kash Patel, a true loyalist who embraces really sort of fringe beliefs about the deep state, about law enforcement, and about enacting retribution in the name of Donald Trump.
Yeah, this is the man who, during the Kavanaugh hearings, said, "My entire life right now is about owning the libs," and seems to have carried on that proposition throughout his career. He has wide influence. He's got one of the top podcasts in the United States. Millions of people follow him. The Agents Association, the FBI Agents Association, had actually wanted a career agent. They'd wanted somebody who'd been an active FBI agent to take this position, but they clearly have been overruled. So between Kash Patel and Bongino, you really do have I'm trying to think of another agency where you have two such Trump loyalists at the very top in positions 1 and 2. And of course, the impact of that then on law enforcement. We've already seen the breakdown of the firewall between the Trump White House and the Justice Department. The FBI will play a critical role in the implementation of whatever it is that Donald Trump wants to have done in terms of law enforcement.
A study in contrast today for the men leaving and going into the country's top law enforcement agency. On the one hand, a send-off for a top FBI agent who tangled with the Trump administration as Trump allies now take the helm, led by people who talk a whole lot more about retribution than the kinds of things that the FBI is known for. Things like preventing terror attacks, cybersecurity, gang violence. The head of the New York field office, James Dennehy, left his office for the last time on Thursday. We showed you some of this late yesterday, to the sound of bagpipes and cheers. He says he was forced to retire after he pushed back against the Trump administration's demand that the FBI hand over the names of agents who worked on January 6 cases. Here's what he had to say to his former colleagues.
There's a motto in the Marine Corps called Semper Fidelis. And Semper Fidelis means always faithful. I will always be faithful to this country, to this organization, and most of all, I will always be faithful to you. And I appreciate you being faithful to me, to this office, and more importantly, our mission. So thank you, and I will be your best cheerleader on the outside. I appreciate it.
So that man, loyal to the country and the Bureau, had to leave abruptly. And that abrupt departure moves the Trump DOJ closer to what they talk about doing, closer to what the far right and Trump's allies have promised to do, a commitment said out loud to make dramatic, revolutionary changes there, and to do what everyone who fears about the future of the rule of law in our country sees as a threat to the institution that serves essential functions to protect our national security and our justice system. There's brand new reporting in the New York Times today about one of the men now in charge, the incoming deputy director of the FBI. He's a former Secret Service agent, a podcaster, and a right-wing media personality named Dan Bongino. That reporting reveals his intense interest with conspiracy theories about the FBI, however baseless, as long as they serve the narratives pushed by Donald Trump about a justice system seemingly weaponized against him. New York Times reports this, quote, Bongino's precise plans for the agency remain opaque. But on recent podcasts, he has said he would rid the agency of politicization and focus on crimes like drug dealing, despite the Bureau's broad mandate to protect national security, investigate crimes, and root out corruption by public officials at all levels. Bongino has frequently focused on FBI officials who, in his mind, showed disloyalty to Trump by pursuing investigations against him or his supporters. Here's what he said after Trump was indicted in the classified documents case.
We fire everyone who stood by. We don't just fire the people who did this. Everyone who stood by and did nothing. While the Department of Justice and the FBI have been ravaged by corruptocrats, everyone gets fired. Everyone. If you stood by and did nothing. That's how.
Fire everyone. Never mind that the agents, all of the agents involved, were simply doing their jobs as their jobs were defined by their leaders. No wrongdoing has ever been found in that investigation. And the charges were only dismissed because Donald Trump won the November election. Not to mention that mass firings would hamper the critical functions of the FBI, the things it does every day. If anything, Bongino's comments about the agency he is now in charge of, he now leads, reveals a contempt for the country's top law enforcement agency.
Ladies and gentlemen, the FBI is an absolute disaster. It is an abomination to the country. The corruption needs to be immediately defunded. The FBI should no longer exist as it's constituted now. The mission should be divvied up. The money should be divvied up amongst other agencies that take their oath to the country seriously.
He said those things again about an FBI being led at the time by a person handpicked by Donald Trump, Christopher Wray. But today, the FBI is in the hands of Mr. Bongino and other Trump allies who are laser focused on retribution on behalf of Donald Trump. It's where we start today. New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. Also joining us, former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, MSNBC Senior National Security Analyst Frank Figliuzzi is here. With me at the table, MSNBC Legal Analyst, former SDNY Criminal Division Deputy Chief Christy Greenberg is here. Glenn Thrush, let me start with James Dennehy. An extraordinary message sent by him to the men and women of the FBI on his way out. The description of sort of a day in the life where in the morning you wear a suit for an interview, in the afternoon you get changed for a SWAT arrest, and you know in the evening there's another interview, and then wash, rinse, repeat. This was someone who loved his job. This was someone who loved the men and women he did his job with. This is someone who loved the country. This is someone who was a veteran. This is someone whose politics are, to me, indiscernible, but clearly do not resemble anything partisan. And this is someone who was purged from the FBI. What does that mean?
Well, the thing that's really interesting about this is he is probably the kind of guy, if there had not been the Mar-a-Lago search, which, as you rightly pointed out, was not in the decision matrix at the FBI. It was a court-mandated search, and it is the responsibility of federal law enforcement and the FBI to execute that. If they had chosen not to, they would have been in violation of the law. But he's precisely the kind of guy you could easily see ascending to one of the top positions in the Bureau if none of this had ever happened. What's really interesting about the whole Bongino dynamic and the Trump dynamic is that prior to the Comey experience in 2016 and 2017, you know, Trump had been on record speaking very positively about federal law enforcement, about the FBI. Over the course of the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that tune has changed. And you know, when I see those scenes of him getting into the SUV around Foley Square it betrays kind of my history as a New Yorker and as a reporter in New York. He was motivated to join the Marines after 9/11. One of my most vivid memories as a reporter covering the attack on the World Trade Center was being in that exact spot where he was standing, which was then covered by ash and debris, and watching the FBI agents from the New York field office fan out over Lower Manhattan to begin their investigation. So it's a very resonant moment, particularly when you see the bagpipes, not only for people who are interested in the future fate of the Bureau, but also to those of us who had an experience around 9/11 with the New York field office and saw firsthand what those agents there were able to accomplish.
What is your reporting, Glenn, on his intent in that, top 10 list that he put out, the 10 best things about being an FBI agent?
I think, it was a big surprise to us. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was a Saturday. It was either a Friday night or a Saturday when we obtained, my fellow reporters and I obtained this internal email that he sent to his staff at the field office, essentially referring to the famous dig in email in which he expressed his determination to resist, along with the interim leadership of the FBI, what Emile Beauvais, the acting Deputy Attorney General, was attempting to push, which was to provide the list, the names of thousands of agents with the intention of isolating those who had participated, not only in the Trump investigations, but the January 6th investigations, which came as a big surprise to all of us. I think what he is attempting to do is to set out a template and a predicate, and 10 is a very biblical number. I'm reminded of sort of the movie The Ten Commandments. To sort of hold, I think what he's attempting to do essentially is to hold the incoming leadership, including Dan Bongino, accountable to these standards, so that there's something external against which to measure what they're intending to do.
Here's what he wrote. We will not bend, we will not falter, we will not sacrifice what is right for anything or anyone. You guys reported this. In the email, he used pointed language that echoed this earlier message. I've been told many times in my life, when you find yourself in a hole, sometimes it's best to quit digging. Screw that. I will never stop defending this joint. I'll just do it willingly and proudly from outside the wire. The circumstances of his being forced to resign have been the subject of a lot of your reporting, and I have to confess, I still don't completely understand it. What did he do?
In terms of his resignation?
Why did they make him leave?
It is not clear, again, as I think you pointed out, and we've seen this with the forced transfers in the FBI field office. We've seen it at the FBI headquarters. We've seen it at Main Justice, and we've seen it in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. And we just reported, two of our reporters just reported that two senior prosecutors at SDNY, the office that defied Main Justice's push to dismiss the Adams charges, have been put on leave and escorted out of the building. So this is going on across all levels. But what he did was resist, and he was in a position where they could compel his retirement. And I think he was fortunate. I think a lot of people who are leaving, particularly the less senior people at the Department of Justice, are leaving into a more uncertain future, both in terms of their pensions and also in terms of what is turning out to be a very glutted market in law firms for them to obtain employment in.
There's a video of Patriot Front and me and Matt Taibbi. I go, they're feds. I go, it's me yelling, where's the fat people? Yep. They're all wearing the same uniform. One guy's got a drum. Get the out of here. These are feds. Yep. These are feds. The day after Kash Patel gets in, they disband.
So that was Joe Rogan, of course, back in March, pushing the conspiracy theory that the white nationalist group Patriot Front was actually a fake FBI front. Now, you probably know Patriot Front because, as Joe Rogan points out, whenever they host one of their hate rallies, they do so in uniform. You can see them on the screen there. Ever since the group splintered off from the white nationalist group that planned the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia back in 2017, Patriot Front has traveled all around the country spewing racist and anti-Semitic hate. But rather than just condemn the group, right-wing conspiracy theorists and Trump allies have insisted that Patriot Front is actually just the FBI trying to make the white nationalism seem like a bigger threat than it actually is. It's not just Joe Rogan pushing that idea. Elon Musk has pushed the theory, as have multiple members of Congress. The core of the theory goes like this. The reason this group wore your uniforms and masks was to hide the fact that they were secretly FBI agents, obviously. And that once Kash Patel was in charge of the FBI, he would simply fire the agents involved and the group would cease to exist. That's how it goes. Well, Mr. Patel was sworn into office back in February, and this was the local news in Kansas City this past weekend.
Kansas City, Missouri residents are expressing alarm after a hate group marched in downtown Kansas City yesterday. We got footage of that group while they were at the Liberty Memorial before they began their march downtown. The group was in a uniform wearing tan hats, white masks covering their faces, navy blue shirts, tan pants and boots. Some were carrying shields. The flags they carried included upside down American flags, the Confederate flag, and a flag that identifies the group as the Patriot Front.
Seems very much like Patriot Front still exists. I wonder how FBI Director Kash Patel will explain that one. See, FBI Director Patel and his number two, Dan Bongino, have a problem. Both of them have spent years promoting conspiracy theories surrounding the FBI. But now they are actually in charge of the FBI. Now they are the dogs that caught the car.
I don't know how Jeffrey Epstein died. I'm not going to sit here and tell you. I wasn't there. All I can tell you is it's awfully suspicious how that happened. Oh, look, the cameras broke. Oh, look, he strangled himself on a bed thing. Wow, amazing how that worked out.
That was Dan Bongino on his show last September. Now take a look at how Patel and Bongino talked about Jeffrey Epstein earlier this month.
You said Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. People don't believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, they have a right to their opinion, but as someone who has worked as a public defender, as a prosecutor, who's been in that prison system, who's been in the Metropolitan Detention Center, who's been in segregated housing, you know a suicide when you see one, and that's what that was.
He killed himself. You want me to? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
What a difference a few months makes. Another conspiracy Bongino pushed was the idea that Secret Service had denied a request from Trump for quote unquote enhanced security just before the assassination attempt on Trump's life. Bongino claimed he had a direct source and alluded to a larger conspiracy. But listen to him now, responding to a question about whether there really was any conspiracy surrounding that assassination attempt.
Are we going to be surprised at what you learned?
You know what, Maria? Kash is not kidding. We've been personally briefed extensively on every single detail, nugget, tendril of this case. In some of these cases, the there you're looking for is not there. And I know people, I get it. I understand. It's not there.
The there you were looking for is not there. Now, this would all just be funny if it were not for the fact that these two guys now actually have to run the FBI. And while they're owning up to the fact that some of their conspiracies had no there, which is good, they also clearly know they have upset their audience, and their audience has told them that too. So yesterday, Dan Bongino announced the reopening of 3 cases, which have been regular targets of conspiracy theorists. The leak of the Dobbs draft decision overturning Roe v. Wade, the pipe bombs found in D.C. on January 6th, and the cocaine found in the White House in July of 2023. Will there be any there? Probably not. But it might just keep their conspiracy theory-loving base happy enough, at least for now.
Now, apparently, we're back in business. This one went up recently in Washington, also about 8 feet tall. It's really big. It shows Trump's signature thumbs-up photo pose smashing down onto the crown of the Statue of Liberty. It says in bronze letters across the front, "Dictator approved." And then on the 4 sides of the base, it has 4 quotes from dictators, all praising Trump. There's a quote praising Trump from Vladimir Putin, one from Viktor Orban, one from Jair Bolsonaro, and one from Kim Jong-un. That dictator-approved one went up a few weeks ago in roughly the same place as the Pelosi desk poop statue. The White House was apparently very unhappy about this one. They put out a sort of sad, scoldy, petulant statement about it. They said, quote, "In the United States of America, you have the freedom to display your so-called art, no matter how ugly it is." They actually said that in a White House statement. The people who created that so-called art apparently heard that statement from the White House and thought, challenge accepted. Washingtonian Magazine got a comment from one of the anonymous organizers behind that piece of art, who told them that once the White House put out that statement, "You have the freedom to display your so-called art no matter how ugly it is." Once they heard that from the White House as an official White House statement, they decided they would meet the challenge. They would try to create, quote, "the ugliest art that we could think of." And so then they put up a new piece. And it actually has that full White House quote on a plaque. And that plaque is on yet another new sculpture, I think deliberately designed to be as ugly as possible. It's got a gold spray-painted ivy and a gold spray-painted eagle and a gold spray-painted TV. And in these images, it looks like the TV is off, but in situ, this sculpture actually has the TV playing stuff. The TV apparently is battery powered, and it runs a constant loop of video clips of Trump doing his signature dance where he looks like he's doing something rude with each hand. And these clips that play on a loop on this sculpture, they include a little squib of video of Trump kind of doing that dance at a party with the late millionaire pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, to whom President Donald Trump was, in fact, a friend. Because for our sins, with everything else going on, with Trump today restarting the total economic chaos of random scattershot tariffs on every country in the world other than Russia, with the U.S. government in its infinite wisdom under Donald Trump, getting us back into the measles business, which we had basically eradicated, but now we've got the biggest measles outbreak we've had in more than 30 years, with President Trump saying he was, quote, "not notified of the decision to cut off U.S. military support shipments to Ukraine." He said he was not notified and he issued no instruction to do that, raising the obvious question of, okay, then if you as president didn't make that decision, who made that decision? With Trump literally paving the Rose Garden and putting this picture of himself up in the White House in the room with all the portraits of the first ladies. I mean, this is what he put up, right? I mean, in the middle of everything else, large and small, that we are contending with, there really is a Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump subplot in our lives now, in which this footage exists and in which the Trump Justice Department put out a statement today saying, never mind all the things we ever said and hyped and screamed about the late pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Turns out it's all nothing and people should stop asking us about it. Headline: Trump administration acknowledges lack of evidence from Epstein documents. After months of promising big revelations, Attorney General Pam Bondi acknowledges a lack of evidence for a host of conspiracy theories, including a, quote, client list. Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi, in fact, not only said there was a Jeffrey Epstein client list that Trump had ordered her to review and release to the American people, she not only said there was a Jeffrey Epstein client list, she said that she had it in her possession on her desk.
One of the things that you alluded to, and this is something Donald Trump has talked about, the DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
Oh, yes, it was a directive of the president. The Epstein client list is sitting on my desk right now, says Donald Trump's hand-picked attorney general. New statement today from her department. The U.S. Department of Justice says there is no Epstein client list. The systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. according to today's DOJ memo. These guys have been hyping the whole Epstein conspiracy theory for years. I mean, this is the guy who Donald Trump appointed to be deputy director of the FBI.
I've already told you the Epstein story. Let's just say a friend who knows about something, if you've heard the story, was on the plane with Clinton with the Epstein thing, and he said, I'm out of here, Daddy-O. I told that story quite a few times, so I know a lot about this story. There are a lot of people who know old Jeff. A lot of people. So it's kind of weird, like this client list is about to come out. Everybody got quiet all of a sudden.
I know a lot about this story. A lot. Says the podcaster who Trump named to be deputy director of the FBI. Now today, knock, 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 FBI, what's up with that? Today, according to the FBI and the Justice Department, there is nothing at all to this Jeffrey Epstein story. Please stop talking about it. There will be no further information released. Client list, what client list? We will not be talking about this anymore. There will be no further information. You should stop talking about this, except maybe if it is raised, on the gold spray-painted television sculpture on the National Mall. Maybe you could learn something about it there, but otherwise, now that Donald Trump is the head of the U.S. federal government, we're just, no.
It's not just the perceived enemies of the Trump administration who are facing retribution. It's also friends of those so-called enemies as well. We first learned how friends of Trump critics were targeted in the purges underway at the FBI last month when the New York Times reported that a top deputy at Norfolk's field office, Michael Feinberg, was threatened with investigation and demotion because of his friendship with former FBI counterintelligence agent Pete Strzok. Feinberg resigned with the understanding that the retaliation he faced meant his career as he knew it, as he'd worked to create it at the FBI, was over. Now Feinberg is speaking out publicly about the extraordinary nature of his ouster and is warning that the purge of career employees at the FBI is even worse than what has been publicly reported. He writes in a chilling new piece detailing the circumstances of his resignation, how he knew once Dan Bongino learned of his friendship with Pete Strzok, everything changed. Quote, prior to that day, I had never faced any sort of disciplinary review or investigation. And to be clear, I was not accused of violating any rules or regulations this time either, nor had any of my cases fallen short of institutional standards. My only supposed sin was a long-standing friendship with an individual who appeared on Kash Patel's enemies list and against whom Dan Bongino had railed publicly. Yet rules turned out not to matter much, and so that weekend, Bongino informed my special agent in charge, who in turn informed me that he was halting and actually reversing my professional advancement. Feinberg adds on the nature of his friendship with Pete Strzok this, quote, if the fact that I sang along to Every Day is Like Sunday while he stood next to me at a Morrissey concert actually represents an imminent danger to the Bureau's integrity, then for the first time in nearly half-century on this earth, I'm truly at a loss for words. And if there are any questions as to whether or not the people who are being ousted at the FBI are the selfless public servants who should fill the nation's top law enforcement agency, here's this from Feinberg's resignation letter. Quote, I love my country and our Constitution with a fervor that mere language will not allow me to articulate. And it pains me that my profession will no longer entail being their servant. As you know, my wife and I are expecting our first child this summer, and this decision will entail no small degree of hardship for us. But as our organization began to decay, I made a vow that I would comport myself in a manner that would allow me to look my son in the eye as I raised him. It is now apparent that I can no longer both fulfill that vow and continue working for our current leadership. That is where we start the hour. The former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI, Michael Feinberg, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Your piece stopped me in my tracks. I read the whole thing, which took a bit, but it was the first window into what's really happening at the FBI. And I wonder if you can just share with our viewers what happened to you at Kash Patel's FBI.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words about the piece. It was actually rather difficult to write because the entire situation, as hopefully the tenor of the excerpt you just read signifies, was pretty heartbreaking. I've been an apolitical civil servant my entire career. I've had some notable public successes countering the intelligence services of the Chinese government. I've had even more private successes, which remain classified. And there's never been a complaint or criticism about the quality of my work or my professional comportment. So it was a little surprising to me that Saturday in May when I found out that Bongino, the deputy director of the FBI, had discovered I was friends with a former executive who is a noted and admittedly controversial figure, but our friendship is entirely social in nature. And that relationship was enough to put a target on my back that Bongino made very clear was going to end my career.
How do you think, or do you know, how he came to know that you're friends with Pete Strzok?
I haven't the slightest idea. My friendship with Pete was not a secret. At the same time, I never bragged about it. I know he is a very controversial figure. But, you know, there's a few of us, probably more than a few, who remain in touch with him. You know, before he became a public figure, he was a very respected senior counterintelligence official, and there were a lot of us who got to know him and became friends.
What is it like working for Kash Patel and Dan Bongino?
So I want to be very clear. I never, including the 3 months at the beginning of this administration where I was the acting special agent in charge, I never individually interacted with either Bongino or Patel. I'm at the point in my career where I have a lot of friends who have risen high up enough that they do on a daily or regular basis. But the only thing I can personally testify to is the atmosphere among the ranks under their leadership. And the only word to really describe that atmosphere is toxic. There is a culture of fear that anybody's career, whether you are a senior executive or a probationary employee, can end at any moment for a spurious political reason. And what we're seeing is that those sort of ideological purges that are going on are really causing an outflow of subject matter experts on a wide variety of national security and criminal threats. And as a result, these efforts of Bongino and Patel's are making Americans less safe.
You write about the movement of FBI agents and personnel to immigration. Talk about that.
Let me be clear. The FBI, as I repeatedly reminded the people I supervised in Norfolk, is an organization under the executive branch. And the chief executive, the president, does have the right to choose whatever investigative priorities he or she wants. As long as there is a law in the books that was dutifully enacted and signed into the U.S. Code by the president, like, we don't get to say no if that's what they want enforced. My issues with the way that the FBI is approaching immigration enforcement is simply that nobody's actually had a hard conversation about what the opportunity costs of shifting personnel and resources to that violation means for other areas of investigation. The FBI hasn't had a budget or personnel increase in quite some time. Kash Patel actually recently acquiesced to yet another budget cut for us. So if agents are being pulled to work immigration, that means they're not working counterterrorism. They're not working counterintelligence. They're not working white-collar crime. They're not working public corruption. These threats aren't going away. They're just not getting attention.
Well, I mean, opportunity cost trade-off, right? Same thing. I mean, what trade-offs have we made as a country? And I understand that it's not illegal for Donald Trump to turn the FBI in a different direction, but it's certainly the public's right to know where we're exposed. So where, in your expert view, I mean, it sounds like you just ticked off areas where you believe we are exposed.
Yeah, look, I don't think the Department of Justice has made a secret that it's not really interested in prosecuting white-collar crime anymore. The head of the criminal division, the Assistant Attorney General at DOJ, specifically said that white-collar enforcement is not good for American businesses, so we're going to pull back from it. The Public Integrity Section at the Department of Justice, popularly known as PIN, its ranks have been absolutely decimated. Ditto for the Civil Rights Division. And those just are the things that most Americans can track because they're in the public eye. I can tell you the number of personnel who previously worked counterintelligence and counterterrorism, you know, a lot of them have been pulled temporarily or permanently to essentially serve as perimeter security for ICE roundups. You know, we saw after the conflict in Iran really heated up and began to involve America, there was a mad rush to move a lot of the people, a lot of those people back to working national security threats. The simple fact is they never should have been moved in the first place because you can't spin up a counterintelligence or counterterrorism investigation overnight. These are very much long-term things.
When you describe the climate as toxic, and as in your words, secondhand anecdotes are what you're talking about, as you never personally interacted with them. What does that mean? What does that look like for folks who do?
You mean for the folks who do interact with them on a one-on-one basis? So what I would essentially say is that the persona both Bongino and Patel portrayed of themselves in various media outlets, whether within a certain political ecosystem or on their own specials and their own podcasts, the sort of credulity to believe conspiracy theories, the ravings against a supposed deep state, the frothing at the mouth tirades against individuals with whom they disagree. That's not an act. That's who these people actually are. I'm aware of very senior executives who go out of their way to avoid one-on-one meetings with either individual because they want there to be an audience and a record of what's happening. That's no way to run a government agency with very serious responsibilities. You need to have the freedom and the fearlessness to speak frankly about what you're finding and what you're doing without worrying that somebody's going to subject you to a 20-minute beratement session.
Joining us now, Semaphore White House correspondent Shelby Talcott. Shelby, what's up with Bongino?
I think that's the question everybody is asking right now, right? Because it is an unusual arrangement to have a co-deputy director of the FBI. And of course, this comes after there was some drama with Dan Bongino being frustrated over how the Epstein files were handled over the past few months. And so the open question that I've been hearing is Dan Bongino going to stay long-term? I've heard some people suggest that this isn't an arrangement he's going to be interested in. Of course, he was a successful podcaster before joining the FBI. So will he return to that? Will he stay at the FBI? Nobody really knows as of now, but this is certainly an arrangement that is seems to be unique at the FBI right now.
Tell me a little bit more about Andrew Bailey and what are his goals?
Well, what's interesting is Andrew Bailey was actually on Donald Trump's mind during the transition team. He was originally floated as a possible contender for the attorney general spot. And so he has been a close Trump ally over the past few years. In Missouri, he sued Starbucks over its DEI policies. He's done a lot in Missouri that sort of aligns with the Trump administration policies. And so he is a more obvious choice as FBI, to work for the FBI, just given his background. When you compare it with Bongino, I know when Bongino was originally tapped, some people were surprised because he doesn't necessarily have the same sort of background and expertise, which is why Donald Trump had originally picked him, because of course Donald Trump doesn't always like sort of the career folks. But this does seem to be a pick that aligns with Donald Trump's policies when you look at what Andrew Bailey has been doing in Missouri over the past few years.
Is there any surprise that Dan Bongino just hasn't been dismissed? Why he's still there, given the fighting with the Attorney General? Or perhaps is there concern that if you let Dan Bongino go and get back into the podcasting world, that he's a liability?
Well, I think the big thing with this administration, and we've seen it, is there's a real reluctance to get rid of people, right? This administration is much more aligned internally, even with those internal fights, than Trump 1.0. I've talked to a number of administration officials and people who worked in the first Trump administration who have said, you know, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the first administration, which was sort of a revolving door at times and caused a lot of external unnecessary drama as they look back on it. I think the other thing is, despite the frustrations over the Epstein files and that drama that played out very publicly, a lot of people like Dan Bongino, and he is very well liked by the conservative movement. And so that matters as well. This is not a case where you have a number of people sort of wanting Dan Bongino to get pushed out, and that matters to Donald Trump and to his top aides.
It's interesting because in the past, when Donald Trump has dismissed people, even if they were popular, he was able to take down their popularity. If they were gone, they were no longer in his orbit, he could just dismiss them and say, I never liked them, and that person was suddenly persona non grata. But this new crop of people that Donald Trump has around him have created whole personalities, whole brands based on MAGA and their alignment with Trump, in some cases becoming extremely popular, like Dan Bongino. Donald Trump doesn't have the same ability to, or does he not have the same ability to dismiss people and diminish them as he maybe once had?
I think it's a matter of he doesn't necessarily want to do that as much because he sees these people as true allies. So in the first administration, a core complaint we always heard was that he hired people who weren't behind him fully. And this time around, Donald Trump, by and large, really believes in his team. And so I think that he doesn't feel like it is necessary because he has a team who are really loyal to the president and his agenda. And you've seen that. And with Dan Bongino, it's really interesting because he really created this following for himself well before Donald Trump tapped him to be FBI director. So there is a chance if he decides to leave that he can go back to that and still have that following. I don't think that following will leave him because he leaves Donald Trump's
but does he go back and then, I know he's aligned with Donald Trump, but does he start talking about Epstein more? And then perhaps does he become dangerous to the administration? I don't know. We'll see. Shelby Talcott, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
I don't know what people think me and Kash are doing all day. I mean, I gave up everything for this. I mean, you know, my wife is struggling. I'm not a victim. I'm not Jim Comey. It's fine. I did this, and I'm proud I did it. But if you think we're there for tea and crumpets, well, I mean, Kash is there all day. We share it. Our offices are linked. He turns on the faucet. I hear it. He's there he gets in at like 6 o'clock in the morning. He doesn't leave till 7 at night. You know, I'm in there at 7:30 in the morning. He uses the gym. I work out in my apartment. But I stare at these four walls all day in D.C., you know, by myself, divorced from my wife. Not divorced, but I mean separated, divorced. And it's hard.
A full day's work is hard. Our colleague Carol Leonnig today broke the news that man who, in his own words, said it was, quote, hard, divorced from my wife, from my friends all day, staring at those four walls. That guy, the number 2 official at the FBI for less than a year, is preparing to vacate that position as soon as Friday. Dan Bongino, who, as we just showed you, made no secret of the struggle he faced in doing that job, has, according to Carol Leonnig's reporting, quote, quietly told confidants he plans to formally leave his job early in the new year and will not be returning to headquarters to work this month. That's according to 8 people briefed on his account. Several people said some of Bongino's personal effects have been cleared out of his office as of last week. Carol's still here, and I want to bring in former Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI, National Security and Intelligence Analyst Michael Feinberg. Carol, he said he was, quote, divorced from his wife, but then he said he meant separated physically, not divorced legally. But tell us what you are reporting about Dan Bongino.
Well, we first started hearing that Bongino was telling his inner team that he was leaving on Friday. Initially, Mr. Bongino declined to really engage on the record about this. We kept doing more reporting, and as you see, we now have 8 sources saying that he told his inner team and some senior FBI supervisors that he's leaving. And I will add, Nicole, that the president has just recently confirmed our reporting, which is always nice to have the president confirm your work when others would not, basically saying Bongino did a great job and is according to the president, under his understanding, is going back to podcasting. What we heard over and over again was that Bongino was not going to come back to the Bureau at all as of December 5th, and that he planned to publicly announce this December 19th. I know I can understand why Bongino probably did not want others to break this news. He wanted to break it first, but we've done that now.
Michael Feinberg, your reaction?
It was a short, tumultuous tenure, but in many ways, at the time he was appointed, Dan Bongino was the perfect man for the job, in that he combined the emotional temperament and impulse control of the president who appointed him with the intellectual rigor and operational savvy of the director to whom he reported, and the respect for the rule of law and constitutional norms of the attorney general who directly supervised them both. So in that sense, his complete lack of dedication to the Constitution, law enforcement norms, and the apolitical nature of the FBI fit right in with the past year in the executive branch. But that said, I have not spoken to a single soul at the FBI who is not overjoyed at this news, because Bongino's impact on the organization has been wholly that of a bull in a china shop, and a great number of people have lost their jobs due to his fickle inability to recognize that people can hold one view in their personal life and not bring it with them to work and execute on their job solely on a professional, apolitical basis.
If you'll both indulge me, I mean, I think Carol is one of the country's most respected journalists because of her objectivity. Michael, you've spent your career in the FBI, and so let it fall to me. This guy is a freaking joke. He wears T-shirts that are obviously too small, and he went on Fox News and complained about how long the workday is as the number 2 at the FBI. The FBI, as you two know better than anyone, protects children from child sex traffickers. And on that topic, Dan Bongino had a successful podcast, in part because he peddled conspiracy theories about Jeffrey Epstein and then got to the FBI and let Pam Bondi roll over him when they decided to cover up the files because Donald Trump's name is in them, a fact confirmed by Susie Wiles this week in 11 on-the-record interviews with Chris Whipple. I want to know if either of you can speak to the lasting damage or the danger that we're in, because a guy that is a joke was the number 2 at the FBI, Michael.
Yeah, look, I was obviously being completely sarcastic in my initial praise of him. His influence on the FBI and his impact on the safety of our country's communities has been wholly negative. He is personally responsible for the jettisoning of a great number of senior executives who dedicated their lives to the service of this country, who had collectively between them centuries of subject matter expertise in how to disrupt terrorist plots, stop foreign spies, and unravel criminal enterprises. And he got rid of them because he was concerned they did not vote for the right person. That sort of justification for raising an entire institution is something that we have never seen before in our country's history. The FBI is a worse place because of him. The country is less safe because of him. And the damage he caused is going to take us decades to rebuild if we ever get the chance.
You know, I pray to God that when, I don't know, cooler minds doesn't even seem like the right word, but when an appreciation of the centuries of experience that he purged from the FBI makes its way back, that in the intervening period, nothing happens to this country, nothing bad. But that's a wish. That is me wish casting. And nobody that has worked in national security thinks that there's a very strong chance that nothing will happen.